There we go. All right, well, welcome. So today what we're going to do is look at how to make some plywood flexible and bendy. So I have created a desk of mine, and it's actually what I'm sitting on right now, that has this contour pattern to it. It gets a gets a lot of attention from visitors that are coming in. So thought to show how to maybe just recreate this desk. I did this desk maybe 5 years ago, maybe even longer. We hosted a furniture society show and just wanted to do something a little bit different to kind of show off and see. The whole process of this desk that I did not take me a terrible long time. Maybe from sit down to start designing it to actually cutting it and having it standing is maybe an hour's worth of time. So it's a very basic process to do this. It is a little bit gets you a little bug-eyed looking at the design. I did cut a piece of this morning. Here is an image of it being cut. And then just wanted to show this video here of what it is like and how flexible it really becomes. So let's get started and learn how to design and make a desk. So what we see on the screen now is what we are going to need to have to make this flexible. This is the cut file or the design from the video that I just showed. And we have kind of this pattern here of what I use to be able to duplicate this across the board. So the first thing that I'm going to do to start off with in designing, a desk is kind of draw maybe a front view of what I want it to look like. So I'm just going to go in to Aspire, but VCarve Pro works just the same way. I just happen to not have VCarve Pro installed on this computer. So I'm going to create a new file. The material is 96 by 48 and the thickness is 1/2 inch. I have not tried this at a 3/4. I would imagine it would work almost as well, but you might have to make the slots a little bit longer and maybe a little closer together. It is a single-sided job, 0 to the machine bed. So I'll say OK to that. So to create the profile, just going to draw out a rectangle. And probably several different ways of going about this. And I'm actually going to just use my measuring tape here to measure off about what I have. So I have 54 inches across the width of the desk. So I'm going to make that X54. And I believe depth height is like 29 inches. So we will go with a rectangle of 54 by 29. So this is kind of the front view of the desk. What I want to be able to do is create a curved feature off on the side as we see. Get back into the photos. So creating this curved shape here, just going to use some node editing to create this pattern and shape. So clicking N for node editing. And I don't need this bottom line, so I'm going to right click and delete that span. And before I really get too involved, I'm going to draw a line starting at the midpoint here, just so later I'll be able to use that to be able to mirror about that line. I'm going to actually undo that because I did not draw that straight. Midpoint, straight down. So that is there just as a placeholder to have a reference of where the midpoint is as we make the arch in the pattern off on the right side. And again, we just had a couple more to join. So what we're doing is creating a arc or a flowing pattern like we have on the end of this desk. And this is what we are going to be reproducing. So going into node editing, and let's just start off with maybe creating, moving this point out, and then move another point in. We could now go and use smoothing to smooth this out. And we want to have this to be a kind of a perfect transition from flat to around. So what we are going to use is the alignment features within node editing. Just going to bring this up so we can see what's going to happen. This line we need to have to be perfectly in parallel with our horizontal line. And I've just discovered a new feature that I have not really paid too much attention to. It has the smart snapping to where it is automatically snapping to that horizontal line. So that's actually very useful. What we once had to do was select one, hold the shift key to select the other. And if you want to have those aligned in the Y direction, just type in the letter Y, moves that. But as you see, it moved the wrong one. And that is because I selected this one first, then this one. Doing it in the opposite order is going to shift that down. So really just kind of creating some sort of a flowing pattern. I think I need maybe another node. A shape similar to that. So again, this is the midpoint. I'm just going to go ahead and trim right now just to know that we only have half of that. Now, one thing that happens when you do a trim, I really don't want this midpoint line to be joined, but a trim automatically joined that. So just going to right click on that node and say cut vector. That now separates those two. Now using the offset tool, I'm going to offset outward maybe half of an inch, but let's mirror that first. So selecting the object, using the mirror function, selecting our other line here, and going to flip about the line. No longer need that midpoint, and I'm going to select both objects. It's kind of strange that a trim automatically joins, but a mirror and other functions don't. But anyway, we'll go ahead and select both of those, and typing the letter J or the join icon and selecting to join. We now have the basic shape of what this desk is going to have. The way I created this was just overlapped the material. So it is 1/2 inch plywood. At the desk part itself is a total of 1 inch thick because this is kind of overlapped on one another. I also created some ends on it to attach it to. Again, I should have really paid attention to what that line was. That's okay. This is a lot of just kind of design on the fly here. So you're seeing my whole design process, failures and all. So a lot of times when you're designing a part similar to this, there is a lot of just, going to do it. I didn't like that, undo it, recreate it, and just you might do something, you realize, there's a better way of doing it. So this is what I just discovered in that process. So again, I want to be able to duplicate this onto the right side now. So again, I selected what I want to mirror first, doing the mirror and flip about line, making sure I have that create copy selected. And then I will connect that together with a line. So now to create maybe the offsets of how I want this pattern to be. The right and the left, both ends, the plywood does meet up at the endpoints here. So again, let's take a look at that picture just so we could see what we're looking at. So kind of creating the shape here. Now, all we're doing this for is just to get a visual to see how we're looking at it. This actually isn't what we're going to really be cutting yet. And just a way to verify that everything is going to fit right. And then also we're going to measure along these arcs to see what we really need it to be. So I'm just going to offset outward to the right. I know it's to the right because here is the start point, looking down the line to the right side. I'm going to offset that out to be 0.5. Right, so that is a good find. Let's figure out what might be going on there. Maybe somebody else will help me out. So I'm going to go into node editing and just kind of, look around to see what might be the holdup that it did not like. I'm not quite sure. So try it one more time. It doesn't work the first time. It's certainly going to work the second time, right? Well, no. But that is just fine. I'm going to separate it. We have to separate this anyway. So I'm going to node edit and separate it right there at that point by cutting. And see if that allows us to offset. And it does. So that is good. That is the one side. And this side, going to be there. I really can't remember what I did to offset it. Now I see what I did. So this one is actually offset to the inside, or to, again, it's still to the right because there is my start point. And just going to continue that line straight across to the opposite side. And again, just using the endpoint, snap down, and we were really going to get into these scissors later. So that is kind of the basic the shape of the desk. And now our goal is to be able to measure the linear distance from the endpoint of this line to the point that we have down here. And we also need to know the distance from the point right around in here to the bottom point here so that we could get the stop point of the pattern that allows it to flex. If you are not familiar, there is a way to measure a distance. So I'm just going to measure from one to the other, and that's 54 inches there. And should have had some paper. So yes, sometimes math is involved. So we're going to go 54 inches. Now, the other thing that we need to do is measure along these arcs. But doing this as a straight line doesn't quite work because we're not getting the arc length. There is another option here that is able to measure along a contour. So selecting the contour shape that we want, and basically are going to just need to start adding up these numbers. So there's another 12.5. Another 9, and I'm just going to do some rounding. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect here. 10 inches. And you'll see that it is kind of turning red on that line. It's really kind of hard to see, but it's a red teal colored line that's going through here. And that final one is 5. 25, 27, 38 inches total that we have from top to the bottom. So now with that all in mind, we're ready to start laying out our flap sheet goods to be able to create this. So I'm just going to select this, move it up out of the way, and going to go with a rectangle. And the total depth of my desk is, well, it's 54 wide, and we're 30 inches deep. And then that rectangle is representing the top side of the desk. The leg part is going to be 38, and then the height, which is really the depth, is going to be 30. And I really hope that the layout with all of that added together is still less than 96 inches, which is good. So now what we need to do on this section of the blank, we need to create a pattern of curves or through cuts that will allow this to flex. And again, coming back to that video of what we want to see here, and this is what we're going to be creating. All right, so I think I may have just clicked a button that is prevented me from sharing my screen. So hopefully that is not the case and everybody is still here with us. Yeah. All right. So now to create this pattern, what we want to do, and I have this pattern here, and this is what we're going to be creating. I started off with creating just a small pattern by manually creating it, getting some measurements, and then we're going to use the array copy to be able to duplicate this pattern much more easily. So starting off with a rectangle, and I am going to be cutting this out with a 3/8 wide bit. So the width of this rectangle needs to be at least 3/8 of an inch. And I did create that to be 0.377. And then the height in the Y direction is, I made it 5 inches. Now you could kind of explore different settings and different variations of that to see the pattern. And we'll look a little bit at distorting later in the video here training to show how that we could possibly distort. We'll see how it works. So with that one rectangle done, I'm going to manually create this pattern. So I'm using the snaps to move or copy. So I should have held the control key down as I snap from this lower left corner to the upper left. That made a duplicate copy. It made a copy because I had the shift key or the control key held down. Then I'm going to choose to transform, move that object, and I'm going to move it in the Y direction by 3/8 of an inch. And to do that, I'm just going to use the relative distance and move it up 3/8 of an inch. Now we need to create basically the same pattern. So I'm going to hold the control down, but halfway or midpoint to midpoint here. And going to move it in the X direction by 0.3/8 of an inch. So I did that, but that's not quite right. And I'm going to double check that because the midpoint of this gap here should be at the midpoint of that line. And it really is not. So we did have that to be. So this gap is 3/8 of an inch. I really need to move and shift these two up by half of that gap, which is going to be 3/16, which is 0.1875. Now, if you did not know it's 1.1875, you could go 3/16 and then it equals, and that equates that for you. I should not have moved it in the X, should have done it in the Y. So now that is kind of the basic pattern that we want to be able to reproduce and copy. So we're just going to create the same thing of this one, just to kind of complete a full section of this pattern. And I do things different every time I do something. Again, I forgot to hold the control down. That's selected, going to shift over. Now, once you really start getting into it and knowing this, these steps here aren't really fully necessary. This is just helping me make math a little bit easier. So with those patterns created, just going to use the dimensioning tool to kind of record the gap between what we have here, between this point and this point. And we already know the others, which is 3/7 in the width and then 3/8 in the height there. So the reason for all of that work was just to get that number of 1.127. And also to get this spacing pretty much kind of right. So we're going to just bring that over here. Not worried exact placement yet, because we'll use our alignment tools when we completely filter this out. But I'm going to be able to use our array copy. And I'm going to do it twice, one for this one and then once for this pattern. Selecting that one first, use our array copy. How many of them do we want in the Y direction? I'm going to say maybe 6 of them are going to fit in the Y, and maybe 20 in the X. And we can go copy. No, we definitely need more than that in the X. So let's bump that up to, oh, we don't. So bring that back down to 20. The gap is not 3/7. We want that gap to be that 1.127. Could bring it down a little bit more, but I do have on the bottom, I do have a flat spot down there. So let's just bring that up another, add another 3 more to it. Going to run the same on this pattern right here. I am going to add 1. I need to create and move this pattern to the bottom side to get it to be offset on both sides with that selected. And again, this is kind of me doing this on the fly. If I were to do multiples of it, I would probably rethink how I'm doing this and doing it completely different than I just did it, 20 minutes ago when I cut that. So I'm going to move this down by 3/8 of an inch. I'm still in relative mode, so I'm going to move that to a minus 0.375 and then create that. Don't need any of that. And I'm going to go node edit. I still want to have this line over there, but I don't want this top and bottom line span. Or maybe I did. I can always put it back. All of these individual points right here, we need to extend those out so we could trim those off. So going node edit, and this is a nice feature of the newer version of Aspire and VCarve Pro that allows node editing of multiple items. And we're going to see another fun feature of the new VCarve, if you haven't figured it out yet. It is the feature of trimming. Okay, I'm putting those lines back that I've already deleted. And the scissor tool that we need to trim all of this off there. And the new feature, if you hold down and just move your mouse across there, they all get trimmed off. There we go. So again, deleting that line. What we need to be able to create is a cutting pattern that is going to cut around the outside of all of these. And this is where your eyes kind of start getting a little bit lost and confused, at least for me. So we really want to have a line like this, and then we need a connecting line every other, or have an opening every other spot there. I am going to not have this as a square, even though the sample piece that I cut, I set as a square. I want to have this as an arc, a little bit smoother transition. I didn't even do that with the desk. I thought I did. But anyway, going to go node edit and convert that to an arc and bring that up to the top. I don't not want to have that joined just yet because I want to be able to duplicate this down the length of what we have here to be able to finish connecting those dots. With that selected, running the array copy, the gap that we want to have is going to be 3/8 of an inch. It might be 3/7/7, but 3/8 of an inch. And let's just do a copy. Yep, it's 3/8 of an inch. That's good. I don't want any in the Y, so the magical keystrokes, Control Z, just undoes what we did. So I'm going to reset the Y down to only one of them in the Y direction. I'm going to double the X. And it is not, you see, we have kind of an accumulation of error that happened there. So it is that 0.77 that we needed. So again, Control Z, 0.77. That's what I wanted. And just make that final connection right there. Now, there's a couple ways that we could create the opposite side here. We could, mirror what we created on the top, or just do a duplication of what we just did on the top side. I don't think either is right or wrong. It just all depends on what your mind is up to that day. So I am going to do it the exact same way. All right, now with that all complete, we are, quite opened up. So even though everything looks like it's closed and, good shapes, we are definitely not. We are completely open. We need to trim some things away. Let's get rid of this line right there. That may have automatically joined some. It did not. So let's go ahead and do just, let's go ahead and Control A does a selects all. We don't have a lot on screen, but that is okay. It's going to unselect what we do not want to have joined. Clicking join with the letter J. And now we should have one continuous outline that it is going to kind of cut all the way around there, and then we'll cut in between all of those vectors there. So once this is created, we're ready to, we just need another sheet for the kind of the profile or the mold of the design. I want to have this basic shape down here. So I'm going to clean this up just a little bit. This side, it really doesn't matter. We're going to get up around the top. And just trimming away the parts that I know I do not want. All right, so that is going to be it, and it did not automatically join that. So make sure that we always stay joined and not get too far ahead onto another product section when we don't have it joined. All right, so yes, we have this little notch here, but that is going to fit just perfectly because remember, we are going to put this side down on top of that. The bendy side is going to flex and bend around here, and then we'll put another duplicate exact copy of what we have here, layer it on top, and come around the bottom side. Again, let's just see if I have the photo still up. So you can see how it's doubled up and as it goes across there. So we're ready to really lay this out on our material now. A couple ways that we could do this. I could create a nesting of this, which I might do, but I'm not going to completely fully nest because we'll try it both ways. I'm not certain if the nesting will automatically will do very well with this part here. I think the nesting is going to tell us that we have need a total of 4 sheets, where I think we could get it 3. But we'll see what happens. All right, so I'm going to do a sweep select of everything that I want to have nested. And before I do that, we really do have to select them individually because I need to say that I want 2 copies of each of these. So apply. apply. So that is giving us that number 2 on that one. And then the number 2 there, that's saying that we want 2 copies of each of those. So I'm not drawing them twice. So now we can see that I'm going to get 2 of the supports and 2 of the desk bendy side of it. So with the quantities selected, I am going to come back up here to start filling in from top to bottom. So the tool diameter is going to be 3/8 of an inch. That's what I'm going to choose to cut this out with. I do want to have at least 1/8 of an inch in between each part. Well, after the 3/8 goes through, it's going to have at least 1/8 of an inch material to remove off. So that will give us a total, kerf cut of that 1/2 inch or a 1/2 inch total between each part. The border gap, let's bring that down to 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch. That is how close are these parts going to allow to be nested to the edge of the sheet. Do I want to allow rotation? Yes, we want to allow rotation. There's no point in saying any greater than 90 degrees. Really just say 180 because there's no way that's going to fit any other way but 90 or 180. Mirror parts to find best fit. Now, really, again, doesn't matter since this is already a mirrored part, but why not? Allow parts to fit inside of one another. We do not want that because it's just no part big enough to fit inside of any of those small parts. I don't ever really worry about any of this. The last vector to be nested, that's if you have like a big set of material and you want to nest all these parts within a boundary, but our boundary is the material set. So we are good to go to preview. Oh, well, it did a good job. I did not know it was going to nest those as well as it did. I thought I was going to try to put each one on its own sheet. So not too bad. I am going to come up on sheet number 3 and modify the layout just a little bit. But before we do that, we'll go ahead and say okay and accept this nesting. And to view each of the sheets, we have sheet 1, sheet 2, and sheet 3. I really should have just told it to do one of these parts because I would have just cut that file twice. I'm not even going to bother toolpathing sheet number 2. So I'm just going to rearrange this a little bit by bringing this down. And the only reason why I'm doing that is to have a more usable leftover waste piece to use for another project, a little bit more material usage that way rather than eating up and figuring out how to, well, you could do whatever you would like to do with that. I just feel that it fits better. Anyway, we are ready to create the toolpathing for this. And since we're on sheet number 3, let's just go ahead and set the toolpathing for these parts here. Show you the video where there is a little bit of a blooper in it. We'll see that at the end, a little bit of a fail on my part. And it was all about hold down and how they were cutting when I cut that sample. So I'm just going to come in here and replace the start points. So that is, right clicking and selecting to make start point or hitting that letter P for the point to start. We are going to cut in a conventional direction. So that means that it's going to start right here and work its way from right to left around this part in the conventional direction and finish up here. So with that start points selected, I want to select them in the order that I want to have them cut. So I don't want to cut this one first, just because of the material hold down and the vacuum and everything. If you've seen our video on nesting and before and optimizing the strategies of cutting. That's kind of what I did there. We have that video out there already. So with that selected, and I did select those in the order that I want to cut, but that doesn't mean that's just what's going to happen. We have to set and tell it that that's how we want to have it cut. Probably how I have mine set by default, but we will view that setting. So we have the start depth to be 0, which is typically 0. Settings that you kind of have to change. There's a lot of arguments I see on forums. I just changed that, the start depth. Well, the start depth has very specific uses, but the only use for a start depth is if you've already removed material. People like to try to control V-carving with that. That's not what you do. That's not how to control the depth of a V-carving. So we are going to cut 1/2 inch deep, and actually a little bit more than 1/2 inch deep, the 10 thousandths, which is enough to go through the material and down into the spoil board. In fact, when I was cutting our sample piece that I just cut, it did a couple slots, and I saw that I wasn't cutting deep enough. And I'll explain that when we watch the video and how I got around fixing that. So the cutter is the 3/8 cutter. It's typical tool database being set to select the cutter. I'm going to cut on the outside in the conventional direction. I do not want to add any tabs. The vacuum, I think, is going to be strong enough to hold this in place. I did create and use a smooth ramp in over a distance of 1 inch. That helps keep the tool in constant motion, and that is going to prevent the heat from building up on that cutter, and that is going to increase the life of your cutter and less chances of breaking a bit when you do a ramp in this way. So the start at here, this is where we have optimized start points. That is not what I want. I want to keep the start points in their current position. So I want it to force its start point to where I've asked it to start. And then the order, so I don't want any of these checked. I want it to be the vector selection order. That means that I selected one, then the second one, that's the order that they're going to get cut. We'll give that a name of cut, then OK. So that was easy enough. That is done. Nothing more needs to be done with that. The other is double clicking on sheet number 1. And there's a couple different toolpaths that we're going to create here. We really could do it all in just one by doing a profile just the same way, selecting the entire object and clicking profile toolpath and calculating. Yes, I'm going to go through. I didn't pay too much attention to all those settings because I know that VCarve Pro keeps the default settings, but there's a couple that they do not keep. So let's view that again. One is I do want to have those set to be ramping, and the corners start at and the order does remain the same. All right, a lot happening in there, a lot of red lines. But let's just go ahead and preview what that visible toolpath looks like. And that is, that's really about it. One thing that when you have multiple sheets, it sometimes gets confusing on what toolpaths are done over here. So there is a groupings that we're able to do, and it's been a while since I've actually done that. So one of these icons, maybe it's not an icon at all. right click, empty group. We could rename. I'm going to call this sheet 3. Go to another empty group, rename that one. Oop. So we've just kind of moved those around. So now we have a group for sheet 1, toolpaths, and then a grouping for sheet number 3. In this case, it really didn't have to do the groups because we only have these 2 toolpaths. And I could have just as easily named this profile 1 instead of profile 1. I could have named it sheet 1. Rename that to cut. Because you really shouldn't leave them as default settings there. But anyway, this is basically it. This is going to give us once we get this cut out. Now, the way I created the desk was just kind of precariously balance these as I placed this on top and secured it with a just a brad nail into the first layer. And then the second layer that I put on top of that, I just glued that down with a couple drywall screws, wood screws from the bottom up into this upper section there. And again, the video of the flexibility. It's really quite amazing in how easily that just flexes and moves around. Could get a very tight radius in there. I don't know, it'd be interesting to see what you all are able to come up with as far as projects. So that was just a 1/2 inch economy line plywood. It is a cabinet grade plywood. I don't know if it's still the Chinese plywood, but it is not the Baltic birch. Baltic birch is a much better product to use, but then again, it's more expensive as well. So it's just 1/2 inch plywood. So let's see if we can't see my blooper to see if I actually caught it. I kind of knew that it was going to happen. So I took a video of it just to see how bad it was going to happen. So you can see this is where it is, cutting it out and going around the pattern. And as soon as it first started cutting this, I realized I made a mistake in what I did. It started right here in the lower, left corner of cutting right there. And I am using a vacuum zone, but I had all the other vacuum zones turned off except for this one zone here. And really it wouldn't have mattered. So with starting right there, it is going to come up around back this way and make its final cut along the, the left side of this board here. Well, I've opened up all the way through to the table here. So it's like a huge vacuum leak that's happening here. I did not think I was going to have enough hold down for this to come across here. I thought for sure I was going to completely lose that board. But you will see that I kind of got lucky, but you will see that it does shift and give way a little bit right here at the end as it comes around right about this section here. When it gets there, you'll see that this whole board kind of shifts and moves on the table. So not too terrible, but vacuum hold down or hold down of any sorts is important. I could have prevented all of that just by moving the start point to be this upper left part of the final cut. And that is, I would have turned on another vacuum zone off to the left here. So as it was coming down through this part, even though we didn't have a strong hold down underneath the part itself, we still would have had a strong hold down on the left side, which would have prevented that board from moving as it did right there at the end. So pay attention to where the start points are and think about the process of how it's going to be cut, in what direction it's going to be cut. So I hope everybody has found this useful. I didn't quite stretch it out to an hour as normally do. So we have plenty of time for questions and discussion of, what do you guys think?
Ryan, this is Kurt. I've never used Aspire before. Is all of this possible in just VCarve Pro?
Absolutely, yeah. Everything that you see here and everything that I've done, there is no difference between VCarve Pro and Aspire. And in fact, everything looks the same. The only difference between Aspire and VCarve Pro is on this modeling tab. VCarve Pro also has a modeling tab, but Aspire has many more functions here. So everything else is identical and works exactly the same way.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Ryan. This is Kristen. I typed something in, but I think it got lost. When you were making those little lines in arc, what was the keystroke for that, or the icon?
Oh, yeah. So sorry, I didn't mention that. So if we have a line, it's going into node editing with the letter N.
Uh-huh.
And if you right click over the line span, and I convert it to an arc. Now the shortcut, I just did a Control Z to undo that. The shortcut for that is the letter A. So the shortcut for any of these are listed off to the right. So when you right click or look at menu options, kind of always look off to the right there, because there's usually a shortcut command that will help. So by hovering over top, I don't have to right click. I could just type the letter A and it converts it to an arc.
Thanks.
No, you're welcome. All right. Well, that is going to be it for today. Thank you all for joining us.